All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath. It is the 13th day of August, Tuesday, and I got a great program lined up for you today. I'm really excited, especially after watching this video. Warren Pollock is back on the program, and I was going to take it kind of a direction tonight that kind of played off the video that I made last night, but after watching Warren's latest piece, Warren Peace, that's funny. After watching...
I haven't heard that before, Charlie.
I just said it, and it's the first time I realized that I've missed this pun all this time. War and Peace.
Well, I've lived through my whole life, Charlie.
Well, I lived through the Charlie Tuna, Chuck, Chaz, Michael, the whole nine. So Warren, we're both in the same boat here. All right, everybody's name's easy to pick apart. Anyway, the name of the video is the X article. The U.S. was overthrown. I did a quick promo video for it. Maybe some of you have seen that. Because I thought it was that good and that informative. So we're probably going to stick to this video and pick it apart a little bit because it's without knowing the information and the research that Warren provided in this, it is self-evident the direction that our country or the place we're at right now and the direction we're going. So if you're listening and not in the chat room and you want to join the folks in chat, wideawakenews.com. Click on the Wide Awake Radio microphone. That'll take you into the chat room. If you want to watch us do this live, we're both sending video. You can watch us on Justin TV. And if you're watching later on YouTube, again, the name of the video that I want you to check out is the X article. The U.S. was overthrown, and you can either see it attached to this re-recording, or you can go to W.E. Pollock's channel, W.E. Pollock, Pollock, and check out that video. Very, very informative. Now, I did put out a video last night. It was Pick Your Poison, enslavement or a beatdown. And it had everything to do with the current situation our country's in. And the whole premise of the video, and I'm going to wrap it up real quick and then get Warren on here to talk about his. The premise of the video is we are all guilty of being beholden to a tyrannical fascist government. We all in our own way have our hands out. One hand's out asking for a handout, asking for the government to come in and save us and baby us and nanny us, and the other hand's pointing at the other guy for doing the exact same thing. And I've covered this quite length. That we have groups of neocons and we have groups of bleeding heart liberals, and we sit here and we yell at one another and we say that it's your fault. No, it's your fault. And that is the point. That is the game. That is the end goal. Because if I'm hating the neocon or if I'm hating the blue stater, then I'm not paying attention to what's happening in my own country. But make no mistake about it. It doesn't matter if you're a welfare recipient for the third generation or if you're a neocon counting on the government to have complete command and control over this economy and a Federal Reserve stealing from our future to buy debt in order for your assets to increase. You are both equally in and dependent on a welfare state. And when you live thinking that you're part of the solution or thinking that you're a participant in this system and you are dependent on that welfare state, then you are nothing more than a slave. Ergo, you can pick your poison. You can be enslaved or you can be beat down. And we see what happened to people who are speaking out or pushing back. They are beat down. All right, that's the premise of the video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But now let's get into this with Warren, because we only have an hour, and I think we'll probably burn it up on the topic in this video. Warren, welcome back to the program, by the way.
Well, good to be here, Charlie.
Yeah, it's good to have you on here. Let me ask you real quick. Henry A. Wallace, that your video starts out with that, and I want you to start off your appearance tonight talking about who he was and what he said and when he said it. Welcome back.
Great, Charlie. Let me start first. I'm pretty much an economist financier,
right?
But I did take a little bit of history in university, and at least 6 credits were in the history of the Soviet Union, which I thought were going to be totally useless with the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it turns out that's not the case. There's a lot of curious correlations between the history of the Soviet Union and U.S. history. And if we look at the Soviet Union, they didn't join the World Bank and other international monetary systems. And really, our relationship with them degraded from a point of being an ally to a point of being an archenemy. And that's sort of where this fellow Wallace fits into place. I'm not saying that we should look at the Soviet Union and say they were doing anything laudable. And we know Stalin was in the Soviet Union. But really, the problem that we have, if we're going to look at things objectively, is we've been told what to think by the media for a very long time. And this media has really been fascist in nature, and it has marched to the tune of its own agenda. In my recent video, I talk about how the press has been controlled by a fellow named Luce, who was a member of Skull and Bones, who was one of the elites, and frankly, he was a fascist. But in my video, I also make the point that there's really two types of fascism in the United States. There's a progressive fascism and a regressive fascism.
Can I want to get into the progressive and regressive fascism because it's really, really important, and it shows exactly how we've been divided into these camps. But before we get down the road, explain who Wallace was.
Well, Wallace was the second vice president of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was the heir apparent to the throne. And I'm making the point that Roosevelt was really a dictator of the United States in one form or another. And we have this concept among, I think, the elite, is that there's some elite that believe they have, as being a noble person of the United States, they have a noble responsibility as a noble to the citizens. So in the progressive fascism, you have a sort of an elite group of people that have gone to Ivy League college, and they've been taught through the humanities that in their position, they have sort of a responsibility to, as a noble person, to the general populace. So that kind of fascism is what was in place in the United States under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But Wallace was a very interesting fellow because he was way ahead of his time. He was a millionaire. He basically grew crops that were genetically engineered, and he made a tremendous amount of money. And he was in charge of the Department of Agriculture during the Great Depression, and he tried to rescue the American farm system from total and absolute destitution. Farmers would grow hogs, for instance, and there would be an overabundance of them, and the price would go to zero, and you'd find lots of farms going bankrupt. At the same time that people were starving in the country. So he implemented policies which sort of smoothed the way for both farmer and also citizen of the country to try to soften the blow of the depression. But more than that, he was really a tremendous thinker. He was a capitalist. There's no doubt in my mind about that, because personally he was capitalistic. And secondarily, he advocated for the well-being of small businesses and also individual innovation. Now, if you read about him, he's cast in this divide and conquer rhetoric as a communist. And what I did basically was try to compare the history of the Soviet Union against American history and look for things which didn't make any kind of sense whatsoever. So I found a memorandum which seemed to have set the tune for American anti-communism, and that was something that was called the X Agenda or X article. And that was an article that was literally broadcast via telegram that must have been about 4 pages long that you could find on the Truman Library. And it outlines all the reasons why the Soviet Union is an enemy. And when that was developed, this guy, George Frost Kennan, didn't realize that he was setting in motion the exact ammunition which the military-industrial complex and the financial complex needed to take over the country, because he was sort of amazed in a few years later that all of a sudden we had the industrialists sponsored by J.P. Morgan, we had all the press, which was Mr. Luce, and they're all interconnected. The magazines, the Time magazine, Fortune magazine, and all the propaganda was focused to the interests of the banksters, war being the greatest racket of all.
All right, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about George Kennan, his position, and how his opinion changed when he wrote this memorandum compared to just a few years later, when normal relations could have taken hold in Europe, in Western Europe, and Eastern Europe, and that didn't happen, and why. And guys, it is all important and relevant to where we're at right now and how we live right now. When the more you learn about history, the more you understand where we're at, where we're going. We're going to be back with Warren Pollock and more Wide Awake News Radio. Hang tight. All right, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, joined by Warren Pollock, W. Pollock on YouTube as his channel. If you're not a subscriber, please do go there and subscribe now. We're talking about this latest video he put out, the X article, "The U.S. was overthrown," and it starts out with talking about quoting Henry A. Wallace, and just at the very start of the video, this is words from Henry A. Wallace. The American fascists would prefer not to use violence. His method is to poison the channels of public information. With a fascist, the problem is never how best to present the truth to the public, but how best to use the news to deceive the public into giving the fascist and his group more money and more power. I mean, come on, that
exactly.
That's it. That's where we're at. I mean, that's where we're at, Warren.
Right, and we're talking about the Soviet Union and the United States, and assuming that there's a difference when in fact there's absolutely no difference. When you look at the Soviet Union, a good part of their history is the history of the security state. So when you look at the United States, the recent history reflects the fact that we are nothing more than a security state. We're a high-tech gulag archipelago. And what sort of keeps us locked down is the perpetual divide and conquer that's in place. People are thinking that they're in a capitalistic system, and they're not. People think that they're in a democracy. Jimmy Carter says that we're no longer in a democratic republic. People think they're in a free society. Maybe they have lesbian and gay rights now, but we certainly don't have basic constitutional rights that are ultimately more important to the majority of the people. So when every issue that is out in the open is framed by someone else that is in power or in control of the situation, everyone becomes complacent and they start to debate things which are pretty much
trivial.
Yeah. And part of my thinking was comparing the history of the United States to some inconsistencies which I saw versus the Soviet history. I sort of came to the conclusion that not only is Soviet history untrue, but also American history is amazingly false. Almost every aspect that you've been taught about American history is false. That doesn't mean that I have a right answer as to what the real facts of the matter are, but I know enough to say that our perceptions regarding the Soviet Union were to someone else's business plan. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I have no doubt that there was a lot of money to be made by being in a state of perpetual war and by having the people in a state of perpetual fear. So you lock down the information, you keep a state of perpetual war going, and you keep a state of perpetual fear in place. And that's that regressive fascism. So right now, if you own a stock, you're a capitalist. You're involved in the system. If you are a Democrat and you vote for Obama, guess what? You're participating in the system. But in truth, neither of these types of participation is any more than a safety valve to keep you in check, to say that you have some vesting in the system that's going to reflect your interests.
You have some skin in the game.
You have some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And what you lack then is the truth, and then you lack a set of good ideas. I personally think that Wallace had many good ideas. He was in touch with many leading economists. He came to the conclusion, as I did, that much of the economic theory that is taken for granted, such as Keynesianism, which came out of the current regime, it was the current regressive fascism, Keynesianism wasn't going to work. He said that. That's something that that Wallace envisioned. And his writings are available online. You can search for them and read them, and you can see what an insightful thinker he was. Nevertheless, he was part of the progressive fascism that was in place before the regressive fascism was in place. So when you looked at somebody like Franklin Delano Roosevelt that was in place for 4 terms, you look at the Bush dynasty that was in place now for 4 terms. You look at the Clintons, which have a possibility of being in place for 4 terms. This isn't a democracy. You look at Chuck Schumer. How long has he been in office? More than Mubarak. So we're not living in a democracy at all. We're living in an oligarchy. So why give your consent to the existing system by voting? It doesn't make any sense, because whether you vote for someone that's on the right wing or the left wing, you're really voting for the same type of totalitarianism, and the president of the United States just being a figurehead, just being a puppet of some way or kind. And I think the first true puppet was probably Truman, and then we had presidents that bucked the military-industrial complex to their detriment. Kennedy being shot, Carter tried to buck the dictatorship. Reagan tried more successfully to buck the dictatorship, but really the dictatorship has prevailed because the American people have been quite comfortable under this kind of totalitarianism. But the problem is that if you live in a state of perpetual war, and if you take your country and it becomes a security state where everything, including the Skype conversation that we're having, is monitored, then you're asking for a result which is at the same level, despicable level, of having a security state. If you have a state which is organized around negative ideals, going to war, dropping drones in Pakistan, dropping bombs on a lot of people, if you have a security state which spies against your people, which may be intimidating Supreme Court justices, which audits people with right-wing ideas in the Tea Party, then you are asking for a result which is undesirable. You'll have the worst possible result. So you could set an ideal for yourself saying, okay, we value our wealth in the society by the people that have education or literacy. That's something I mentioned in the video. Right. We measure the value of our society in availability of healthcare. And we know that we're the most costly type of healthcare system and possible with the least practical results. We have a poor education system. So we're not really a wealthy society anymore. People might have money in their hands, but I don't think they'll have money in their hands for very much longer.
No, I agree with you 100%. When we come back, I want to break down progressive versus regressive a little bit, just to hammer that home, to show how we are made to feel that we are part of this system. And then let's get into pick your brain a little bit about what you think the future holds by looking at the past. We're going to be back with Warren, Edward Pollock, and more Wide Awake News Radio. Hang tight. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Warren, are you hearing me all right?
Yeah, you're back, Charlie. We got you back. We were all set up. We were going to just let Warren take it. This was going to be the Warren Pollock show. You know, we don't need you.
You don't need me tonight. Warren can certainly talk his way through the next half hour. We do have a big thunderstorm right here in Bozeman, Montana right now. So, or big thunder bumper, I should say, pushing this way. So if I do lose out, Gary, run with it. But I want to continue the conversation a little bit, Warren, and I want to cover this right now in case I do. My signal is interrupted. Regressive and progressive. Regressive, absolutely, I see as neocon. Progressive is everybody who is voting this administration, thinking that they're voting for something different than we had under Bush, but feeling like they've had a say or a hand in the direction of the country. And in reality, we change equations. We change reporting methods. We change how we're going to paper over the disaster that is our economy, the disaster that is our political system. But at the end of the day, we stay right on the same course, which is a more dependent populace and a more powerful government. How is that done through this regressive and progressive con game?
Well, I think regressive is anyone that's a business opportunist that is going to march you towards war. It's going to look to control the financial system and will ultimately look to profiteer through the control of that financial system. That's how I would define a regressive totalitarianism. It's your classic fascist. It's a guy that is going to own all the businesses. He's going to write regulations to his own advantage. He's going to engage in policies which divide and conquer people. He's going to engage in war. He's going to engage in NSA spying. This is not about Democrat or Republican. The regressive fascist is both Democrat and Republican. There's absolutely no difference. We have these ideas now of liberal and conservative, and those aren't the same definitions that used to exist many decades ago, before World War II and during World War II. The country was organized entirely, totally differently from an economic point of view. There was a much more government-business cooperation that occurred prior to World War II and thereafter. The reason that the government was involved was because people were wiped out in Great Depressions. They were wiped out by robber barons. They were living in conditions that were terrible, very similar to a third world country where the workers hardly had a living wage. And the government helped to moderate some of the excesses of this regressive fascism, which led to war. It led to World War I. It led to other previous interventions. And really, the United States has been in a perpetual state of war. And now with the war on terror, every piece of information that you put is subject to review because we are all terrorists. Anyone that is wide awake is basically a terrorist. It's very hard to get wide awake because the information quality is so poor. The progressive fascist, that is sort of a very different type of fascism. When you looked at somebody like Wallace, he had the idea to scientifically manage the economy to the best interests of the people. That was far way before his time, and the closest country which has done so is Singapore. And in Singapore, you'll find the greatest capitalists, but you'll also find public policy. And that's very much what the progressive dictatorship was about. If you look at Singapore, it says it's a democratic state, but really it's also a part of that fascist system, progressive fascism. And sometimes when things get very complex, people say, okay, we can just have sort of one of these magic theories of economics. If we just do this, this, and this, everything will work. And things aren't that simple. They don't work that way. And that's something that Henry Walker, realized. But whatever good ideas he had were basically discarded in favor of someone else's business interest. And we could have had, a great peace dividend after World War II. It's something we didn't do. Instead, we funded covert action in Turkey, covert action in Greece, and we know we have problems with Turkey right now. That's something that we anticipated on the show. And all of these areas that we stirred up will come home to roost. And eventually, because of the weaponry, we now know India has a nuclear submarine which they're building. We know
an aircraft carrier they just launched today.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's Japan launched an aircraft carrier.
Mm-hmm. I mean, India. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're on a roll tonight, but yeah, that story I grabbed this morning. India launched at least the hull of their. It'll be a couple more years to fit it out, but their first modern aircraft carrier, one of multiple they have planned.
Right, but the real thing with India, I think, is the design. They took a Soviet nuclear submarine that could launch nuclear missiles, and Pakistan has been our traditional ally and enemy because of this idea of socialism and communism and everything else. India was in the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union not too long ago. Mm-hmm. So we have a country which is more functional, India, and we chose not to ally with them on this basis of ideology. And now we have Pakistan, who is an ally enemy. Probably, was involved in the World Trade Center bombing and involved in terrorism, hiding Osama bin Laden. So our policy doesn't make any kind of sense. The only thing that it is a self-destructive policy, and that's regressive fascism. Now, when you go to the ballot box, you don't have a choice. You're probably voting Democrat or Republican for regressive fascism. It would be better maybe if we had a democracy, but the people. This is something Franklin Delano Roosevelt said. He said that the people are educated, they're literate, but they're not well informed. And when you looked at Luce, who I also mentioned in the video, This is somebody that imposed his own view of the world on the public through his media empire. This is someone that did so to craft the information landscape, very much like now, where there's maybe 4 corporate media, outlets. And we heard from Edward Snowden today that all the press emails have been intercepted with an eye to control the news, not that it was already controlled otherwise. So we're not living in a free society. I don't think there's anything that you could do about it at this point in time. I think that what we're going to experience is loss. That's the only outcome that we have is an experience of loss.
So
I don't think we're going to have a bank holiday, like the one that we had in Cyprus. I think our fate will be a little more insidious or dangerous.
Is this the end result? Because way back, when you watch this video, it'll break it down in more detail. But you talk about George Kennan, who was, if I'm not mistaken from your work, he was the first ambassador to the Soviet Union after World War II.
Well, he eventually became ambassador to the Soviet Union when he wrote his report in 1946. He was not the ambassador.
Okay,
but he came up with this big report, which was sent via telegraph, if you can imagine that. He apologized for hogging the telegraph system because every single character had to be it's not like the internet today. Every single character had to be broadcast securely through this telegraph system, and I imagine it typing out letter by letter very slowly. So he typed out this 4-page memorandum saying, that this is the Soviet Union is an absolute evil, that we're going to have major problems with them. And then all of a sudden, you see this guys at Skull and Bones said, aha, this is the way that I could make money. This is how I could preserve the great military-industrial complex that was born after World War II. I can gather all the money and my power for myself. And it's the same players over and over again. I mean, one of these regressive fascists was Lyndon Johnson, believe it or not. I mean, these people were all connected, Republican and Democrat, absolutely no difference. But if you talk to an American, you say Lyndon Johnson, well, he's a liberal, he's progressive. It's nothing of the case. He's not progressive at all. It's a regressive fascism. And he may have had progressive ideas, but they were never going to be implemented. Certainly, he was just a puppet. Let me go into the Vietnam War. Let me go and abandon the Great Society. And he had some vestiges of progressive thought, but in reality, he was no more than a puppet. But for us, we're not going to see a bank holiday like we did in Europe. We get just one step closer to the dirt nap, where I think that there's 3 vulnerabilities which I see in finance currently. One vulnerability is in pension plans, because that money.
Hold on a minute, Warren. Hold on. We're gonna. This is gonna be the last break right here, and when we come back, let's talk about how we're not going to have the same model as we've seen around the world in the last couple of years. The reason I brought up Kennan was because Kennan wrote this 4-page memorandum, and it was the policy going forward until the end of the Soviet Union, even though it was just a few years after he wrote it in 1948 that he said now things have changed and we could start dealing with the Soviet Union in Western Europe as a nation, not as an enemy. We're going to be back with Warren Pollock and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute. Hang tight. All right, welcome back to the final segment of Wide Awake News Radio on this 13th day of August, Tuesday. Warren Edward Pollock is our guest. The video that he put out, we've been talking about is, I don't have it pulled up here now, the X article, The U.S. Was Overthrown. Check out this video. I'm going to put it in the chat room again right now. If you're watching this later on YouTube, there will be a link down below, the X article, The U.S. Was Overthrown. Me, Gary, and Warren were having a discussion during the break, and I kind of lost place, but the end result of progressive, regressive fascism is the exact same. My question, I guess, Warren, and then take this to where you think we're going, as we were alluding before the break, that we're not going to have another crisis event or a European-style event. It will inevitably be a dirt nap for the mighty military power. But is this an end result of George Kennan, his report, the policy that came out of it, the decades of perpetual war, and the end result is a complete and total dumbed-down police state that is fighting amongst itself, that is an empire in decline? And, I mean, is there any trajectory other than ultimate collapse, ultimate decline?
Well, if you look at the NKVD, you look at the GRU, KGB, and the Soviet security state, which is still in place, are we really any different than they are at this point?
No.
I mean, part of my thinking post-Stalin was that the Soviet Union was an incredible bureaucracy. Are we any different than they are in that regard?
No. And arguably, it's more insidious in our respect. And that's what I was talking about during the break. I mean, you have an event like the Snowden event, and some people have sent me emails saying this was a setup from the get-go. And, I don't know if it was or not, but I do know that one thing has occurred. A vast amount of reality has been dumped onto the people of the West. And at the end of the day, the reality states that this state, this government, this spy apparatus will take your data, be it electronic or physical, and they will compile it, and they will keep it, and they will use it, and you have nothing to do about it other than to say thank you for keeping me safe. This information was dumped out there, and this isn't information to you or I or Gary or the audience that is very much shocking at all. But to the average person who is, we say, asleep or plugged into pop culture, this was just one foul swoop. They let the planet know that there is government apparatus in control. The ultimate police state is here, and it's okay. We have your best interest at heart. So go ahead.
Well, most people are going to say, well, if I have nothing to hide, I have nothing to fear. And that's a great rationalization. And going back to Soviet history, just read Solzhenitsyn, and you'll get an idea of what the Gulag Archipelago is about. But we're dealing in a more sophisticated state. To maintain control, all the wrong decisions will be made with as much leverage as necessary. I mean, if we were a threat, we'd be shut down. If Alex Jones was a threat, he'd be shut down. If Jeff Brents was a threat, he'd be shut down immediately. It's better to monitor people. And the majority of people don't even know that they're being monitored. I mean, so far, we've seen Hal Turner imprisoned. We saw Martin Armstrong imprisoned. We've seen Adam Kokesh imprisoned. We have hardly seen any banksters imprisoned. I mean, not that these guys are great guys, but the idea that you could actually talk about something in some way, if you touch someone the wrong way, that's in the courts or in power, if you have something to lose, if you are, let's say, Elliot Spitzer might have made a fine governor, he might have been reform-minded, might have done prosecutions of the banksters. Oh, you happen to see a prostitute? Well, we know about that because you moved money around, and now we'll take you down. And that's what happens, is that no one is clean enough that is a reformer to withstand total information awareness. If you don't have privacy, you have nothing. And that's not even that was never in the Constitution. The Constitution never talked about privacy. And now we have a Supreme Court, I'm sure, which is manipulated. We have courts which no longer provide justice or law. So my thinking is economically, your money will be taken away from you, just not the same way as it was in Cyprus. There's many places where you're vulnerable, and they'll tell you where it's coming. I mean, the Fed gave you an article about the risks of ETFs, leveraged ETFs. We were talking about all these derivative instruments last time I was with you, Charlie. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to fail next. This idea of having an insurance company, an annuity through an insurance company, that's going to fail. Having a pension plan through Detroit, that's going to fail. Having a pension plan through a private company, well, why do you think you're paying $30,000 for a car that's worth $15,000? Because you're biding time for the pension plans which are insolvent, such as GM. So it's not going to be a clear bank holiday the same way that we had in Cyprus. It's going to be something more insidious. Right now with gasoline, just the regressive fascism says, well, you need X million gallons of ethanol, even though your fuel use is down. So normally they would sell ethanol as a percent of the gasoline, 10%. Mm-hmm. They've regulated how many gallons. So when the demand for gasoline goes down, the special interests still get to sell X number of gallons onto the marketplace. So everything is totally controlled, and as these controls sink in, things become less practical. A hospital bill might be $40,000. You might lose your coverage with a high deductible policy. You might find that you have health care exchanges that provide you with no coverage, only you're taxed a huge percentage of your income to get coverage which doesn't even exist. So all these things are gradual thefts that are occurring to the American people. But we talk about breakdown crisis and dirt now. I want to raise something that no one has really thought about here at all. In Japan, they had a nuclear meltdown. They took most, if not all, of their nuclear reactors down, and the infrastructure still functioned. If we had just 20% of our nuclear reactors down in the United States, would you still have an operable power grid? Here in the metropolitan area, we had a hurricane, which I frankly wish was worse than it was. But
Why?
still, well, because that would have forced the day of reckoning. It would have been the Katrina moment for people in New York City. And even though I suffered through this thing, I wish that went 4 or 5 more blocks up from where I am, because that would have at least been something which would have been impossible to ignore. You would have had starving people in New York City. And that, to me, would have brought the system down so that we can actually go up from going down. I mean, it's going to take us going down before we get up. And that process is probably a blind side of some kind. It could be financial. More than likely, it's a military blind side that we're going to have of some sort, or it's going to be just destitution. We're just going to sit in for a
Warren,
while.
is it going to be a 2-decade wade into this pool of destitution, or do you see, you're back in the financial circles again? Do you see, a Japan who's talking about another $10 trillion in yen, or 10 trillion yen being pumped into their system? Do you see a derivative bomb based in debt going off? I mean,
I see derivative bomb going off sooner than later. But it's very interesting is now that these interest rates are very low. When I look at the pension plans, they're all in stocks and bonds. So if bonds are not working for them anymore, they'll try to rotate over to stocks. So there's a lot of shuffling that's going on in the background. I have meetings with people that are highly educated. They can't see the forest for the trees. They don't understand that what they're doing in finance is totally, at this point, irrelevant. It's totally and absolutely irrelevant to what's going on. For the average person on the ground outside of New York, when you're in New York, it's vibrant, it's prosperous. It looks like there's a tremendous amount of wealth. But deep down on the surface, the jobs that paid $400,000 a year are paying $2 million. The jobs that are paying $200,000 are paying $100,000. And a kid that got out of school with an Ivy League education is trading at Citibank, earning $60,000 a year, which may sound like a lot of money, but it may not be a lot of money in New York City. And Citibank's going to make sure his salary doesn't go up particularly much. So you could live very well in Montana for $60,000, but in New York City you probably could not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, and it's the point that like I was saying at the beginning of the video, that was my commentary last night, which is the next leg down, the final leg down, if you will, the dirt nap leg down, is going to hit an economy that is being sold and being propagandized as 15,000, 16,000 on the Dow, and New York's doing great again. These banks are making money hand over fist again, but in reality, 47% of the population that is in the working pool, it only has part-time or full-time jobs.
Part-time jobs. Yeah, Obamacare, part-time jobs. That's the solution there.
Yeah.
And you don't know what the statistics are. But, I'm driving around here in Long Island, New York, and there's a bunch of drunk 21-year-old girls yelling and screaming out of the car. And these folks are absolutely entitled. And that's the kind of people that you're going to have to deal with in sort of this sort of collapse, people that are entitled. It's going to be very difficult. The awakening is going to become very difficult. We talked about you traveling to China, and I thought that was sort of interesting. And one of my contentions in China is that place could become unglued in an instant.
Absolutely. There's well, we only have about a minute left, so go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean,
I was going to say you have what 1.6 billion, and you have them all busily doing something. That's a lot of bowls of rice every day that have to be. It's kind of I guess
rice
that's
bowls.
Kind of,
well, it's the same thing here. I mean, people in finance have a very big rice bowl here, but they're not entitled to it. And they'll wake up one morning and find out they're not entitled to it. But I don't think the people are going to realize to finish where we started. I don't think people are going to realize that they've been living under a dictatorship in one form or another in a very long time.
I don't think the people. Go ahead.
It would certainly be to our advantage if people figured that out instead of being played by the system. It'd make our job, what we're trying to do, a little bit easier.
Absolutely, and it would be, the realization also has to occur that by plugging into the system on one end or the other, you are still in effect enabling a fascist regime to dictate and control you, being if you're on the neocon end or the liberal end. It is all a matter of control through progressive or regressive type tactics. Warren Pollock, absolutely great video. I'm glad to see you're making more of them, and I appreciate it so much.
Great to see you, Charlie.
You too, Warren. Great to see you again, too, as well. All right, guys, stay tuned for Jeff Ritz because he is coming up next tomorrow night, same time. We will have Woody O'Brien coming on here to talk about abolish fiat currency. So make sure you get in here and support him. Thank you all very much again. Jeff's coming up next. Have a good night. Peace.